Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Here are the top stories for the hour. Slovakia says Russian oil deliveries have resumed through the Druzhba pipeline. South Korea has raised concerns over the safety of its citizens and vessels in Iran. And Kazakhstan wants to increase oil exports through western routes, including the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. South Korea's special envoy today met Iran's foreign minister for high-level talks. The meeting addressed Seoul's concerns for its citizens and shipping in the region. Minister Arakchi also used the occasion to state that aggressors, meaning the US and Israel, bore responsibility for the war's consequences. Seoul's foreign ministry spokesperson provides the details of the diplomatic exchange.
In meeting with Foreign Minister Arakchi, Special Envoy Chung asked for Iran's continued attention to the safety of about 40 South Korean nationals currently in Iran, as well as to the safety of our 26 vessels and their crews. In response, Minister Arakchi said he would keep in mind our requests regarding the vessels, would continue to take good care of the safety of our nationals, and positively assessed the uninterrupted role played by our embassy. The Iranian side also explained, however, that issues concerning the strait are matters related to the United States.
Iran claims it has collected its first transit tolls from ships passing through the strategic Strait of Hormuz. A senior lawmaker says the revenue has been deposited into the central bank, with fees varying based on cargo type and risk level. The move follows reports that Tehran is demanding prepayments in cryptocurrency or Chinese yuan. The critical oil route has faced severe disruptions since the US-Israeli war with Iran began in February, even as a fragile ceasefire remains in place. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has criticised the position of the European countries during the Israeli-US war on Iran, also suggesting mediation between neighbouring Afghanistan and Pakistan. Turash Shurililiu brings us more from Tehran.
The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Europe's silence regarding the US-Israeli aggression against Iran is unacceptable. He pointed specifically to attacks on the civilian nuclear centers under UN verification. In a phone call with Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani on Wednesday, he also warned against the weakening of the non-proliferation regime due to the dual approach by the European countries. According to Iran's foreign ministry, Tehran's top diplomat also spoke by phone with the Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi, appreciating Kabul's solidarity with Tehran during the war. Araghchi welcomed the recent easing of tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, saying Iran is ready to help resolve differences between the two countries. Araghchi also had a phone call with his Sri Lankan counterpart, Vita Herat, thanking him for the assistance provided to the Iranian Navy sailors when their ship was targeted during a training mission. He described the US attack on Iran's Dana destroyer as an unprecedented war crime. He added Iran will use all legal and political means to prosecute the commanders responsible. Araghchi also met with Chung Byung-ha, South Korea's special envoy to Iran, on Wednesday to discuss regional developments and bilateral relations. He told the visiting official that the US and Israel's military aggression against Iran has been the cause of insecurity in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Turash Shurililiu, Tehran, Foreign News.
The European Union has formally approved a €90 billion loan for Ukraine. The announcement comes as EU leaders gather in Cyprus for a two-day meeting where Ukraine is expected to be high on the agenda. The massive loan was cleared after Hungary lifted its veto against it. It coincides with new EU sanctions against Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to join discussions in Cyprus, where leaders will also tackle broader issues, including energy security and regional tensions. Solar power already accounts for about a third of Europe's energy capacity, but current global events are pushing some countries to demand more solar energy to replace fossil fuels.
demand for solar energy is surging across Europe as households look for ways to shield themselves from rising energy costs and reduce dependence on fossil fuels. The spike comes amid global market volatility linked to the war in Iran, which has driven up oil, gas and electricity prices. And it's prompting many countries to turn to renewable alternatives. In Germany, solar equipment suppliers say the shift has been quick and dramatic. Warehouses are filling up as companies rush to keep pace with demand, stocking large volumes of solar panels and expanding logistics capacity.
This is evident from the fact that ever since the war in Iran began, we've really noticed that customers are keen to avoid fossil fuels and shun this dependence, and therefore they want to become self-sufficient. Inquiries have really skyrocketed. We're talking about a 3- to 4-fold increase. The number of orders has also risen by the same margin. This means we really need to expand our logistics space significantly. There's now a surge in demand for solar components, not just here, but across the entire industry.
Customers in Germany say solar panels are not only cheaper in the long run, they're easy to work with.
They reduce energy costs because I can install them myself. Especially if you do it yourself, you can save a lot of money.
Industry leaders expect the initial spike to stabilize, but the long-term impact could be lasting. For now, rising prices and geopolitical uncertainty appear to be accelerating the transition to solar energy as more households seek greater control over their future.
A Russian airstrike has hit the southeastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro, killing 3 people and injuring 10 others. Officials say 5 of the injured remain in hospital as emergency crews continue rescue efforts. Meanwhile, Russia's Samara region also reported casualties from a drone attack. Governors stated 1 person was killed and several injured after drones struck industrial sites and a residential building in Samara. Britain's Prince Harry made an unannounced visit to the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on Thursday morning in a show of support for the country in its 5th year of war with Russia. The Duke of Sussex is set to attend a Kyiv security conference during the 2-day trip. He's also expected to visit the demining charity supported by his late mother, Princess Diana. This is Harry's 3rd trip to Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion began. Russia is maintaining its oil supplies and is thereby playing its part to help stabilise the market and limit the impact of the crisis triggered by the Iran war, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said. He added that beyond maintaining supply, Moscow has no specific initiatives to propose within the OPEC Plus framework. Peskov said that global oil demand was rising while volumes available on the market declined.
At the moment, as you know, we are contributing to this stabilization of prices and minimization of the consequences of the crisis for the global energy sector. Russia continues to supply oil, demand is growing, the amount of oil offered on the market is not increasing, but on the contrary, is decreasing. There are no other initiatives currently on the agenda.
Lebanon's fragile ceasefire with Israel is under growing strain, with new deaths reported and political tensions over talks. At the same time, France has been mourning a soldier who was killed over the weekend in Lebanon.
The latest violence in southern Lebanon has raised new doubts over whether the US-mediated ceasefire can hold beyond its scheduled expiry on Sunday. Wednesday became the deadliest day since the truce took effect on April 16th, with at least 5 people killed, including journalist Amal Khalil, whose body was returned to her hometown overnight. Meanwhile, France held a tribute ceremony on Thursday for Sergeant Major Florian Montorio. He was a UN peacekeeper killed in an attack in the south last week that French officials say was likely carried out by Hezbollah. With growing pressure, Hezbollah lawmaker Hassan Fadlallah said the group supports continuing the ceasefire, but only if Israel fully halts military actions.
We want to continue with the truce, but on the basis of full compliance by the Israeli enemy. Full compliance means a halt to assassinations, a complete ceasefire, a cessation of aggression, a halt to the bulldozing of villages, a halt to the destruction of villages, and then paving the way for the enemy's withdrawal through procedures undertaken by the Lebanese state, but not via direct negotiations.
Fadlallah also repeated Hezbollah's rejection of direct talks with Israel, even as Lebanese and Israeli envoys were due to meet again under US auspices. Lebanon is seeking an extension of the ceasefire, but continued strikes and mounting casualties are making that increasingly difficult.
Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has welcomed the reopening of the Druzhba pipeline. All flow has resumed after months of disruption. Crude deliveries to Slovakia restarted on Thursday. It marked the end of an outage that Ukraine said was the result of a Russian strike on the pipeline. Hungary and Slovakia rely heavily on Russian energy and have sought to maintain supplies despite EU efforts to phase out imports following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Fico said the resumption of the pipeline shows the issue was a political one. There has been no immediate response from Ukraine.
If you ask me whether I believe the Druzhba pipeline will continue to transport Russian oil on and on and on, I cannot answer that, and I am not going to make any predictions here now. I believe that a serious relationship between Ukraine and the European Union was established yesterday and today through the agreements reached regarding the loan and the opening of the Druzhba pipeline. I could say a lot of things right now, but I'll say just one thing. I think that the opening of the Druzhba pipeline at 2 a.m. this morning confirms that the Druzhba pipeline was not damaged. Do you know what I'm talking about? It wasn't damaged, and the Druzhba pipeline and oil were used as tools in a geopolitical struggle. We must also take into account such a scenario because there is a war, and during a war all sorts of things happen.
Wildfires are once again testing emergency response systems in northern Japan, with thousands forced to leave their homes. Officials warn the situation remains unpredictable as crews race to contain the flames.
More than 1,800 people in northern Japan have been ordered to evacuate as wildfires continue to spread across Iwate Prefecture. Authorities say the fires began on Wednesday in a rural coastal area where more than 150 hectares of forest have already burned. One blaze started with several buildings already on fire, while another broke out hours later nearby, spreading close to homes. Evacuation orders now affect around 700 households as firefighters work to contain the fast-moving flames. Despite the scale of the fires, no casualties have been reported so far.
Regarding the forest fires in Otsuki Iwate Prefecture, we are aware of roughly 15 hectares of damage to forest in the Kozuchi district and roughly 140 hectares in the Kirikiri district as of 3 a.m. today. 7 buildings, including 1 residence, have been damaged in the Kirikiri district. There are no casualties.
The government has activated its crisis response systems, establishing an information office at the Prime Minister's headquarters to assess damage and coordinate efforts. Iwate Prefecture is no stranger to such disasters. Last year, the region experienced its worst wildfires in decades, which burned nearly 3,000 hectares and forced thousands from their homes.
US Navy Secretary John Phelan has been dismissed from his post with immediate effect, according to Pentagon officials. The brief announcement gave no formal reason, but sources cite disagreements over naval reforms and strayed ties with senior defence leadership. The move comes amid wider Pentagon changes under Pete Hegseth and marks the first removal of a service secretary in Donald Trump's current administration. Navy Undersecretary Hung Kao is expected to step in as acting secretary while officials continue to review the situation. North Korea and Russia have been showcasing closer cooperation this week with new progress on a cross-border bridge and a ceremony in Wonsan for a hospital project. Russian Health Minister Mikhail Murashko attended a ceremony in Wonsan linked to the construction of a hospital. North Korean state media described it as symbolizing the friendship between the two countries. Pyongyang also said work is moving ahead on a new road bridge across the Tuman River. It said the crossing is intended to boost trade, tourism and the movement of people. The bridge project was agreed during President Vladimir Putin's visit last year. The two countries have expanded contacts since signing a strategic partnership in 2024. Thousands of Samsung workers gathered outside one of the company's chip sites in South Korea as pressure builds over pay and conditions. The dispute is threatening to disrupt AI chip production at a critical moment for the global semiconductor industry.
At this sprawling chip complex south of Seoul, workers from Samsung Electronics staged one of the company's largest ever rallies. Union organisers and police said around 40,000 people joined Thursday's demonstration. It comes ahead of a planned 18-day strike next month, which could disrupt production of advanced AI chips. At issue is a growing dispute over pay and work conditions. Workers say there is a widening gap in bonus pay compared with Samsung rival SK Hynix, which recently surged ahead in supplying high-bandwidth memory used in AI systems. One union leader said the dispute goes far beyond wages.
Semiconductors are the most important industry that will determine the future of the Republic of Korea, covering AI, electronics, automobiles, and more. If the people working in the most important industry are not fairly compensated, who will take responsibility for the future?
Some say the pay gap within Samsung is already driving employees to work for competitors instead.
Many employees are leaving for SK Hynix. These days, there's even talk that the people who want to go to Hynix but can't are the ones coming to Samsung, and many also say that people are leaving for Hynix because of their abilities. It can't be helped. At the end of the day, more than 90% of employees work for pay, and the compensation gap has become so wide that it's driving these moves.
Despite the worker action, investor sentiment appeared largely unaffected, with Samsung shares closing at a record high, buoyed by strong earnings from SK Hynix. A small group of shareholders joined the workers on Thursday. They voiced concern that a prolonged strike could disrupt production and impact factory operations.
China's XPeng says it's moving closer to mass-producing flying cars as the electric vehicle maker accelerates its push into next-generation mobility and robotics.
It's a bird, it's a plane, and as soon as 2027, it could also be a car. For decades, modern engineering has been fixated on taking four-wheel transport into the air. Now, Chinese electric vehicle maker XPeng says it expects to begin large-scale production of its flying cars next year, marking a major step beyond traditional vehicles. The company has already received more than 7,000 orders, with most coming from within China, where it is still working to secure final regulatory approval.
We are aiming for final type certificate approval this year, very soon. And with that, we can launch official sales and delivery to customers. So before the end of the year, you'll start to see large volume production and delivery. And but maybe towards the end of the year. So next year, we expect full-scale delivery in terms of volume production.
XPeng is also pushing ahead with autonomous driving, planning to launch robotaxi testing in the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou later this year. The company says it could produce hundreds to thousands of robotaxis within the next 12 to 18 months, with global trials expected to follow. At the same time, XPeng is expanding into robotics, with humanoid machines set to enter production as early as the fourth quarter. Initially, those robots will be deployed in customer-facing roles, such as reception and sales support.
The robot, we actually aim to also be volume producing later this year, probably towards the fourth quarter. And it will initially be used in our scenarios within the companies, for example, sales stores, in our offices as a receptionist, in our sort of exhibition halls to curate to our guests.
The company is also deepening partnerships as it scales internationally. Executives say they remain open to further collaborations as they expand into new markets. XPeng already operates in around 60 countries and expects overseas markets to drive more than half of its revenue within the next decade.
We'll take a short break now, and when we return, we'll discuss how energy developments are shaping Europe's response to the war in Ukraine and what it means for financial support for Kyiv. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline have resumed, restoring a key supply route for Russian crude to parts of Europe and potentially unblocking an EU financial package intended to support Ukraine. The development highlights the ongoing complexity of Europe's energy relationship with Russia, where efforts to reduce dependency continue to intersect with practical supply needs and broader geopolitical considerations. So the situation also raises questions about how energy security, sanctions policy and financial support for Kyiv are being balanced as the war in Ukraine continues. Now, let's bring in our guest. Jan Kasper joins us, a researcher from Matthias Corvinus Collegium from Budapest, Hungary. Jan, thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Now, the restart of the Druzhba pipeline restores a major route for Russian oil into Europe. How do you analyse this development in terms of regional energy security?
Well, it was stopped for 3 months and resumed a few hours ago. So, my opinion on this it's clearly a political game between Budapest and Kyiv, and I have to say that Mr. Zelensky played it in a very smart way. His goal was to put pressure on Viktor Orban, and Viktor Orban was defeated. So, as Prime Minister Fico said this morning, I really think that it wasn't a technical issue, while the question of who attacked the pipeline, probably the Russians or the Ukrainians, actually that's quite a secondary question. And now it is. So that's a huge victory for Mr. Zelensky and his government. That's completely clear. He obtained this huge loan package, and at the same time, he obtained a big victory in Budapest because he really satisfied of the outcome of the election that happened on April 12th. The opponent of Viktor Orban was elected, and this leadership will be way more pro-Brussels and pro-Kyiv than the previous one was.
Okay, so the EU has worked to reduce reliance on Russian energy since the start of the war. Does this development suggest that dependence hasn't been fully overcome?
That's the point. I mean, that's a very interesting point, and it's a huge contradiction because in the heart of this game, we had the Hungarians, rather that they are on the side of Viktor Orban, on the side of Peter Magyar, that wanted the oil to get delivered again, but that's Russian oil. So actually, I cannot really understand why they're very happy in Brussels, because their goal theoretically is to end dependence on Russian oil and gas. And now, since this morning, we are again in the situation that we have since decades. So for Hungary and Slovakia, it doesn't change anything. Ukraine was putting a lot of pressure on Hungary and on Brussels, etc. But actually, now we have exactly the same situation as 4 years ago when it comes to energy delivery to Slovakia and Hungary.
And how does the continued flow of Russian oil impact the effectiveness of sanctions imposed on Moscow?
Yeah, and actually, there is no Hungarian veto today, of course, because Viktor Orban is about to leave the power, and Peter Magyar is going to be the next prime minister, probably at the beginning of May 9. So now the sanctions can be voted, and they accepted today the 20th package of sanctions, which is a clear political will sent to Moscow, but a lot of questions can be raised around the efficiency of those sanctions, because what we can see is after 4.5 years, we don't have any result on the battlefield. So now they want to have a great impact on the Russian energy sector, energy revenue, but the reality is that that the Russians doesn't need anymore the European market. That's only a small share in their GDP, and they are rather interested in the Asian market. So again, a lot of ideology and clear and very honest political will in Brussels, but when it comes to the reality, to the revenue, to the money, we can raise a lot of questions.
And Jan, there have been divisions within Europe over energy policy and sanctions enforcement. Could this development deepen those differences?
Well, now, you know, the European, the black sheep of the European Union is gone. This black sheep was Viktor Orban, so I guess that there will be more clarity and more unity in Brussels that used to be during years when Viktor Orban was in power. And of course, Brussels was clearly campaigning in favor of the opponent of Viktor Orban, and it's a victory for them. They were happy of this, and Ursula von der Leyen recognized that she was supporting the opponent of Viktor Orban. That's completely clear. But now, when they will face a problem of decision-making, they cannot put the responsibility anymore on Hungary, you know, because now all the member states are approximately on the same line when it comes to the support of Ukraine. So at the same time, it's a big success for Brussels, but it will cause issues also because they cannot put their finger on Hungary when everybody will see that their policy doesn't have any impact on the war in Ukraine.
Okay, and Jan, could developments like this influence future EU policy on diversification of energy sources?
You know, this word of diversification is very interesting because diversification, it means that you are importing energy from different countries, from different itineraries. And all these people that are in favor of a radical change of the European energy policy, they want to stop importing oil and gas from Russia. They think that this is diversification, when diversification is, instead of having 2 or 3 ways to import, is having 4. So I don't really understand what they are doing. Now, the thing is that we are changing our dependency on the Russian energy to buy more LNG from the US, which is a way, the price is higher. So I can see some kind of cognitive dissonance in Brussels when it comes to diversity. And actually, when you see what's happening in the Middle East, the reality is that maybe in Brussels, they will realize that we still need Russian energy. Of course, dependency is a very bad thing, and it makes us face a lot of threat when it comes to it, because Russia is using this dependency to put pressure on us. But completely decouple the European economy from the Russian energy in the next few years, considering what's happening in the Middle East, would be a big strategic mistake, I think.
Jan, thank you so much for your contribution today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Amid rising regional tensions, Mark Rutte had held talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara on Wednesday, focusing on strengthening NATO's collective defence and enhancing cooperation ahead of a key July summit in Turkey. Our correspondent Adam Morrow reports from Turkey.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte met President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Wednesday to discuss regional developments and preparations for an upcoming NATO summit, which will be hosted by Turkey in July. The closed-door meeting in Ankara was also attended by senior Turkish officials, including Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Defense Minister Yashar Guler. At the meeting, Erdogan stressed the importance of stronger inter-alliance cooperation and called on European NATO members to assume greater responsibility for collective defense. He also highlighted Turkey's growing defense capabilities, especially in the field of air defense systems. A core NATO member since 1952, Turkey has the alliance's second largest military and plays a critical role in safeguarding its southeastern region. In recent years, Ankara has also become one of the world's leading defense manufacturers, supplying drones, naval systems, and electronic warfare technologies to allied and partnered countries. Shortly before his meeting with Erdogan, Rutte visited the Ankara headquarters of Aselsan, a leading Turkish defense technology firm. Speaking to reporters, Rutte praised Turkey's achievements in the defense technology field, noting that stepped-up defense industrial production remains a top NATO priority. Rutte said the issue will be at the top of the agenda at the upcoming NATO summit in Ankara. He also said NATO had to do more in terms of defense industrial production, adding that the alliance could, quote, learn a lot from Turkey. Rutte also reaffirmed NATO's commitment to collective defense, noting that in recent weeks, NATO air defense systems had intercepted 4 missiles fired toward Turkey from Iran. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkey has joined a growing number of European countries curbing its use of digital tech for young users after passing a new law prohibiting social media for children under 15. The ban also includes stricter controls on online gaming, including age ratings and limits on access to unrated titles.
A bill banning social media for those under the age of 15 has been passed by the Turkish Grand National Assembly. The draft law on amendments to the law on social services and other laws covering provisions related to the use of social networks entered into force. The article "Deletion of Content and Blocking of Access to Posts" that was annulled by the Constitutional Court has been amended. Under the new rules, social media service providers will not be able to provide services to children under 15 years of age and will have to take necessary measures, including age verification, to prevent the provision of such services. Social media service providers will take the necessary measures to provide personalized services specifically for those over the age of 15. These measures will be published on the social media service provider's website. The regulations extend beyond social media to online gaming. Platforms will be prohibited from offering games without proper age ratings, and unrated titles may only be made available to adults under the highest age classification. The law will enter into force 6 months after being published in the official Gazette. Turkey joins Australia, France, Greece and Portugal in adopting similar child protection frameworks for the digital space. Turkey's new decision on social media follows a deadly school attacks in Kahramanmaraş and Şanlıurfa provinces.
Kazakhstan wants to increase oil exports through western routes, including the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline and the Trans-Caspian international transport route. Kıvanç Keskinbayev of Kazmunaygas says shipments along the Middle Corridor, a route that avoids Russia, could increase if oil flows through Russia's Druzhba pipeline continue without disruption. He was speaking at the Caspian and Central Asia Oil Trade and Logistics Forum in Baku. Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara and the accompanying delegation arrived on Wednesday in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, on an official visit. During the visit, Ahmad al-Shara met UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, discussing ways to strengthen cooperation between the two countries. The two sides discussed relations and ways to bolster cooperation, particularly in development and economic fields. The meeting marked al-Shara's third stop on a Gulf tour after Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Afghanistan and Iran are highlighting closer ties following a call between their foreign ministers. Kabul also signalled support for ongoing Iran-US diplomacy, calling dialogue the way forward.
The Afghan Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi spoke by phone with his Iranian counterpart Sayyid Abbas Araghchi to discuss the regional situation and the latest developments in relations between the two neighboring countries. The Afghan side says Muttaqi described bilateral cooperation as positive and progressing. He welcomed the rising level of trade between Afghanistan and Iran and also pointed to broader cooperation in other sectors. However, the most notable part of the conversation was his comments on diplomacy between Iran and the United States. Muttaqi called that diplomatic approach a constructive step and stressed that outstanding issues should be resolved through dialogue and negotiations. For his part, Iranian Foreign Minister Sayyid Abbas Araghchi reportedly praised the growing cooperation between the two countries and the progress made so far in bilateral relations. He also shared Iran's views on how those ties can be developed further going forward. The Afghan Foreign Ministry says Araghchi also briefed Muttaqi on the latest developments in talks between Iran and the United States. So overall, this was not just a routine diplomatic contact. It was also a signal from Kabul in support of engagement, negotiation and continued regional diplomacy, while at the same time highlighting deeper political and economic cooperation with Tehran. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Central Asian leaders are being warned that water security is becoming an existential issue for the region. Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev said that water challenges can no longer be treated as routine, urged countries to move beyond declarations and take coordinated action. Tokayev cautioned that failure to cooperate could lead to consequences far more serious than simple shortages. He proposed elevating a unified Central Asian water initiative to the United Nations level, presenting it as a joint regional position and integrating dedicated UN water structures within the region. A new round of talks between Georgia and Kazakhstan highlights growing interest in the Middle Corridor. However, infrastructure gaps continue to slow progress. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
The meeting between Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili and Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev comes at a time when the Middle Corridor is shifting from political narrative to practical implementation. For both countries, this route is not just a diplomatic talking point. Kazakhstan is actively seeking to diversify its export routes westward, reducing reliance on traditional northern corridors that pass through Russia. Georgia, positioned on the Black Sea, sees itself as a transit hub connecting Central Asia to European markets. Their interests clearly intersect, but not equally. Kazakhstan is already deeply embedded in multiple large-scale projects, working closely with the European Union, China, and regional partners to expand transport and energy links. Its role is defined by resources, skill, and geography. Georgia's role, while strategically important, depends heavily on its ability to offer efficient transit infrastructure and stable logistics. The European Union has now moved beyond general support and is investing in concrete connectivity projects across the wider Middle Corridor. At a recent meeting of foreign ministers in Luxembourg, Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos made clear that the Middle Corridor is no longer just a concept, but a developing network backed by infrastructure projects and investment. Engagement is accelerating, particularly with Azerbaijan, Turkey, and increasingly Armenia, where rail, energy, and transit systems are being actively developed. This creates a competitive environment where participation is determined less by political alignment and more by delivery capacity. Georgia remains part of the route geographically, especially through its Black Sea ports, but is not at the forefront of the EU's current project pipeline. This is where the Georgia-Kazakhstan meeting needs a reality check. While both leaders emphasize strategic partnership and corridor expansion, major bottlenecks remain, including limited port capacity, underdeveloped rail links, and coordination challenges across the route. In practical terms, this meeting reinforces political alignment rather than delivering immediate change. The future of the Middle Corridor will depend on which countries can translate strategy into infrastructure and secure the investment needed to make the route faster, cheaper, and reliable. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Climate and environmental pressures are pushing Turkic states to work more closely together. Officials meeting in Astana focused on how to coordinate their response to shared regional challenges. The Organisation of Turkic States held a ministerial meeting in Kazakhstan's capital on the sidelines of a UN-backed regional environmental summit. Discussions covered practical cooperation on sustainable land use, water management and circular economy policies. The meeting also addressed ways to strengthen coordination in tackling climate-related risks across the region. A joint declaration was signed at the end of the talks. Kazakhstan and Turkey have agreed to allow military transit through their airspaces, a move set to boost mobility for both nations. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Kazakhstan's Senate has ratified an agreement with Turkey allowing military personnel and equipment to transit through the airspace of both countries. The deal creates a clear framework for using each other's air corridors, including for deployments linked to UN peacekeeping missions. For Kazakhstan, this means more direct and practical routes, especially through Turkey, which connects Europe, the Middle East and Asia. The process will be strictly regulated. Each flight will require prior approval from the relevant authorities, requested in advance through diplomatic channels. Annual permits will apply only to military transport aircraft. A single diplomatic clearance number can also be used for other purposes, including humanitarian aid, official delegations and training activities. Both countries keep the right to refuse or cancel any request if the rules are not followed. This is important for Kazakhstan, where national law generally does not allow the transit of foreign military forces and equipment unless it's covered by international agreements. As regional dynamics continue to shift, the agreement is expected to make coordination easier and improve mobility, particularly during joint exercises and peacekeeping operations. However, officials have not said what specific operations or needs led to the signing of this agreement. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now we'll take a short break, and right after we'll discuss Georgia-Kazakhstan cooperation in advancing the Middle Corridor development. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Now, our actual point of discussion now will be tensions that have emerged within the European Union over remarks made by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen regarding Turkey's regional influence, with an EU lawmaker publicly criticising her comments. Now, to discuss, let's bring in our guest, Mr. Bekir İlhan from Turkey Research Foundation, joins us from Ankara, Turkey. Bekir, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Now, an EU lawmaker has criticised Ursula von der Leyen. Perhaps first you can tell us what Ursula von der Leyen said, and then we can discuss the EU lawmaker who's criticised her comments on Turkey's influence. What does this reveal about internal divisions within the EU on how to engage with Ankara?
Yeah, Ursula von der Leyen, in her remarks, said that, Turkey poses a threat to the European Union, and she said that, the European countries should succeed in completing Europe, so that Russia, China, and Turkey, poses a threat to the continent. And I would say it's not surprising that, given the ideas and beliefs of Ursula von der Leyen towards Turkey, but you know what, it's another level that comparing Turkey with Russia and China, I would say it's another level. And I would say von der Leyen is not alone in this view, I would say, because many European leaders, many European elites, I would say, would share the same same biased and flawed, understanding and position regarding the Turkey, and I would say there is a divides in the European Union regarding the Turkey. I would say on the one side, there are people like von der Leyen, they are somehow kind of carry anti-Turkey sentiments, and on the other hand, there are elite factions, who are carrying much more positive views towards Turkey. And right now, I would say this division between the European elites, I would say, will, harm the potential, the potential between European Union and Turkey, because both sides, both the European Union and Turkey need stronger relations in these times of crisis and these times of uncertainty, I would say.
Okay, so having said that, Bekir, and knowing that within the EU there is this anti-Turkish sentiment, but for Ursula von der Leyen to actually voice this and make a comparison about Turkey to China and Russia, when did this become a talking point? Why is it a talking point now? I mean, Turkey is a strategically significant NATO ally. Turkey is a wall between the Middle East and Europe. Turkey has absorbed thousands of refugees from the Middle East because of the conflict that doesn't seem to stop in the region. Why is this a talking point now?
Yeah, as you said, that Turkey, has a big potential for Europe, and I would say, and the both sides, should engage in positive way. But I would say one cannot compare Turkey with Russia and China. It's illogical. Of course, Turkey is not an ordinary country, but given the hostile position of Russia and China, you cannot compare candidate states like Turkey with a hostile country like Russia and China, I would say. And I would say for the Leyen's remarks, I would say, at this point, they are very unfortunate remarks, and I would say, these are just another reflection of a flawed and biased, position towards Turkey. And I've just said, many European elites, share the similar beliefs. And as you said, for European Union and Turkey, shares many interests, given the potential. In migration management, in defense industry, in the war in Ukraine, I would say the European Union needs Turkey more than Turkey needs European Union. But European elites, at least some faction of European elites, should come to the understanding that they cannot build a very important security environment without Turkey. Alienating Turkey is not best interest, is not the Europe's best interest, I would say. And in the long term, I would say the European Union, given these, anti-Turkey beliefs, I would say, will suffer more, against the Russian threats, I would say. And as I said, Turkey is a candidate country, and it's been nearly 3 decades since the recognition of the Turkey as a candidate country. And of course, there was no major progress in recent years. But for now, Turkey, carries a huge potential for Europe, and also Turkey can contribute the economy and the, political and the, military aspects of the European Union, I would say.
Okay, and Bekir, in addition to that, Turkey also remains a crucial partner on issues such as migration and regional security. How does the EU balance criticism with strategic necessity?
Yeah, I think it's up to European elites, I would say. As I just mentioned, there is a division among the European elites, and I would say it's not an it's an open secret that many European elites carry, or they have very negative sentiments towards Turkey. But at some point, I would say they will also come to the conclusion that they cannot compete with the challenges without Turkey. Of course, as I always been saying, European security is incomplete without Turkey. Just look at the war in Ukraine. The European elites, even the anti-Turkey European elites, just came to the conclusion that, without Turkey or alienating Turkey, is not Europe's best interest. And I would say in the long term, if they keep, continuing on this way, I would say the potential, between the European Union and the Turkey will be busted. But I would say on the other side, there is also a positive side. There is another faction in the European Union. They are a little bit much more positive towards Turkey. Maybe if they succeed in set up the agenda regarding the Turkey, I would say the European Union will also engage in a very positive way with Turkey, I would say.
Okay, and the EU has faced challenges in forming a unified foreign policy stance. Does this episode highlight broader structural divisions?
Yes, European Union or European countries, cooperate on many issues, from the economy to the tourism to the agriculture. But as you said that, there is no unified foreign policy stance, or there is no single or unified, security policy. It's the crisis of the European Union, and I would say it's the historical crisis. And I would say in the short term, I'm not sure that the European elites or the European countries will be able to solve this problem, because it's kind of a collective action problem. And because the European security or the European security architecture, has a different problem. Of course, they will say that the Russian threat is always there, but also there is division between France and Germany. France and Germany are the, engineering countries of the European Union, but I would say their different perspectives regarding the security, is the number one obstacle, for a unified European foreign policy. And I would say it's just as you said, a structural problem, and that's why I believe that there is no short-term solution for that. And that's why I believe that Turkey can contribute to the security of the European Union, because other than the political problems, the European countries also suffer from the other problems. Some European countries, I would say, have military problems, have defense industry problems, and Turkey can contribute in many areas, from manpower to the defense industry, But I would say, as long as European Union or at least, the some faction in the European Union, keeps, maintain their anti-Turkey position, European Union will suffer more in the, long term and the short term, I would say.
Bekir, thank you so much for joining us today. We always appreciate your time and analysis. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good day.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.